Prologue. June 2014, Deserts of Iraq. Joel Neer. The desert stretched endlessly before me, a vast expanse of sand under a merciless sun. Our outpost, nestled among the ancient ruins of an old civilization, felt like a prison. We were stationed here to protect what was deemed a significant archaeological find, an ancient temple believed to hold relics and carvings that could unlock secrets of the past. It was a mission shrouded in mystery, with orders coming directly from the top. Days were long and brutally hot. The sun bore down on us, reflecting off the sand and stone, turning the air into a shimmering haze. My squad and I had grown used to the harsh conditions, our skin tanned and cracked from the relentless heat. We were a tight-knit group, bound by our shared hardship and the camaraderie that came from facing danger together. Evenings were our only reprieve, huddled around a small campfire, sharing stories and laughs to keep the encroaching darkness at bay. Remember that time in Kabul when Sergeant Daniels tried to ride a camel? Corporal Ramirez laughed, his voice breaking the tense silence. Yeah, he nearly broke his neck, Private Thompson added, chuckling. I smiled, the memory a brief escape from our current reality. Good times, I said, though a part of me ached with the loss of those simpler days. The ruins themselves were hauntingly beautiful, a stark contrast to the desolation around them. Towering columns and crumbling walls bore intricate carvings, depicting scenes of ancient battles, rituals, and deities. My task was to meticulously document these carvings, tracing the cold, etched lines with my fingers. It was a tedious job, one that seemed pointless to many, but it held a strange fascination for me. Every night, as the temperature dropped and the desert was bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, I found myself drawn to the temple's inner sanctum. It was there, among the shadows and the silence, that the carvings seemed to come alive. They whispered of a long-forgotten authority, a power that once ruled this land. The symbols depicted a figure shrouded in shadows, its form both majestic and terrifying. An unsettling familiarity crept over me as I touched the symbols, feeling a connection I couldn't explain. You spending another night with the ghosts, Neer? Ramirez teased one evening, noticing me heading towards the ruins. I shrugged, trying to mask the compulsion I felt. Just doing my job, Ramirez. He shook his head. You're obsessed, man. Just don't let those old gods get you. Life at the outpost was a cycle of monotony and tension. We were always on alert, the threat of insurgent attacks a constant shadow over our days. The locals viewed us with suspicion, and sometimes outright hostility, adding to the sense of isolation. My squad had suffered losses before, comrades taken by ambushes or roadside bombs. Their absence was a constant ache, a reminder of our vulnerability. Then came the day that shattered our fragile existence. It started like any other, with the scorching sun rising over the horizon, casting long shadows across the ruins. We were on edge, having received intelligence of possible enemy movement in the area. The morning was spent on patrols and checks, our senses heightened, our nerves frayed. As noon approached, the temperature soared, and we sought refuge in the shade of the ruins. I took the opportunity to continue my documentation, my fingers tracing the ancient lines with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. The air was thick with tension, the silence of the desert broken only by the distant echo of sirens warning of imminent danger. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Mortar shells tore through the serene silence, the ground shaking violently. I was thrown against the stone, shrapnel slicing through the air, embedding in my back and leg. The world became a blur of pain and noise, my ears ringing, my vision swimming. Agonized cries of my comrades filled the air, their faces contorted in pain and betrayal. They haunted me, merging with the dark symbols on the wall. Desperation surged as I lay in the warm dirt, bleeding and barely conscious. My squad was gone, and I was alone, clinging to life. The ground beneath me cracked, a dark fissure swallowing me whole, pulling me into an abyss of primordial terror. I landed in a vast, ephemeral hall made of shadow, A colossal figure bound in heavy chains sat on a throne of iron, its form a shifting mass of darkness. The air reeked of decay, and the oppressive silence was broken only by a low, resonant hum. The figure's presence was overwhelmingly powerful, its essence seeping into my very soul. It raised a hand, less an offer, more a summons. The shadows around the throne swirled and whispered, voices of the damned calling me to join them. An insidious force tugged at my heart, promising power, understanding, and release from my earthly torments. Compelled beyond reason, I moved forward, each step heavier than the last, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and desire. The cold, shadowy hand extended towards me. A deep, commanding voice broke into my mind, speaking of a pact sealed in darkness. Desperate and on the brink of death, I fell at the figure's feet. "Save me!" I croaked through a cough of blood, and then offered with my remaining will. "Save me, and I will give you everything I am." The last of my strength ebbed away, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness as the figure on the iron throne looked down on me with the smallest hint of a grin crossing its lips. Voices echoed in the distance, muffled and indistinct. I was aware of being lifted, my body jostling with each movement. Pain lanced through me, sharp and unrelenting. I tried to open my eyes, but the world remained a blur of light and shadow. "He's alive! We've got him!" A voice cut through the haze, urgent and strained. I felt the rough texture of a stretcher beneath me, my body swaying as they carried me away from the ruins. Each step sent waves of agony through my shattered form, but I clung to the memory of the god, the figure on the throne. His voice echoed in my mind, a dark promise that I couldn't let go. "Hang in there, soldier. You're going to make it," another voice said, closer now, filled with determination. I was dimly aware of the hum of a helicopter, the sound growing louder as we approached. The rush of wind and the thumping of the blades became my world, drowning out everything else. Hands secured me, strapping me down, and I felt the lift as we took off, the ground falling away beneath us. "Stay with us," the medic urged, his face swimming into view for a brief moment. I tried to focus on his eyes, finding a strange comfort in their steadiness. Delirium took hold as the pain and blood loss overwhelmed me. I drifted in and out of consciousness, clinging to the image of the god on the throne. His eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to watch over me, a silent reminder of the pact we had forged. Through the haze, I could hear the medics working frantically, their voices a constant murmur of urgency. I felt the sting of needles, the pressure of bandages, but it all seemed distant, as if happening to someone else. "He's stable for now. Let's get him to the base," one of them said, their voice laced with relief. As we flew through the desert sky, the ancient god's voice was a haunting echo in my mind, a promise of something that I could not yet fully comprehend. Chapter 1. Present day, Spokane, WA, USA. Joel Neer. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, the echoes of a dream lingering in my mind. A quiet and haunting voice called to me every night, a constant reminder of that day in the desert. I glanced at the clock. Only an hour before I needed to be at work. The dread of the dream clung to me, a foreboding I couldn't shake off. I knew I couldn't lay there much longer. My job at the bar down the road was already my second this year alone, and I had promised my mom that I would keep it. God knows she had already supported me enough after I left the service in the broken state I had been in. It had taken me well over a year to get through rehabilitation, and even longer to move out of the house I had grown up in. My parents had done everything they could to support me during this time, and I knew it. They were the only reason I was still alive after years of battling the depression that even to this day still haunted me. It had been my mother's encouragement that had finally gotten me out of the house and into some semblance of independence again, and I was thankful for it. Still, I struggled to hold myself together, and the recurring dream didn't help. My mom, Kim, was my beacon of hope, and the reason I had found work here in Spokane, thanks to her friend Jim. A former military man like myself, It was because of that and his relationship with my mom that Jim had overlooked the last few times I had been late. But I knew that leniency wouldn't last forever. I swung my feet over the bed and felt fur between my toes. I smiled wearily and looked down to see Kip laying on my pants and shirt. "Hey, bud, are you keeping those warm for me?" I said. Kip was my newest addition to my life, an 11-month-old black cat that had wandered into my apartment when my door was open one night. I didn't know where he had come from, but I was thankful all the same for the companionship the little guy offered, even if Kip seemed to be there only for the food I had left out, and now the occasional cuddle session. Kip had made a habit of finding the comfiest piece of clothing lying on the ground to make his bed, and this morning was no exception. Seeing Kip's contented expression, I laughed. "I still need those, little guy. Mind letting me have them?" After a moment, Kip just yawned and lazily rolled over before falling back asleep. I shook my head at him before going to my dresser and grabbing my nicest black shirt along with my old worn-out work jeans and headed for the bathroom. It was clear to me that Kip wouldn't be moving anytime soon, so I let him be as I took a quick shower. As the hot water cascaded over my skin, I shook my head, pushing the memories away. I didn't want to think about them now. The memories of the past only brought back everything, and that was just too painful. Losing so much had been hell for me, and I just wanted to move past it. Today was one of those days where that seemed impossible. Even after a decade, I couldn't shake the nightmares. After my shower, I got dressed and returned to the room. I didn't have many pictures, but I did have one of my dad from his Navy days. My dad had been everything to me, a hero, my mentor, my driving force. The photo was a constant reminder of the man he had been and what I aspired to be. I was going to be 34 in a few weeks and still lived in this small apartment. That wasn't the life my dad had envisioned for me. Even before his death from cancer, he had urged me to be more, to do more, to live more. "Joel, you have so much potential," he used to say, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "Don't waste it." I never understood why that had been so difficult. It wasn't that I was homeless or jobless, but there never seemed to be enough. I didn't make friends easily, and having never stayed anywhere long other than in Baghdad during my service, I had no real network to build upon. Maybe it was my fault the way I was. I didn't know for sure, but I did blame myself. Kip patted over to me and I leaned down, ruffling his ears, happy for the distraction. "Thanks, little guy. Let's get us something to eat." Kip purred happily, and for a moment I was convinced that was all I needed. Someone whom I took care of and who, in turn, took care of me. I flicked on the TV, the sudden burst of light and sound momentarily filling the void of my quiet apartment. The news anchor's voice was a dull murmur in the background as I shuffled into the kitchen. I filled the coffee maker with water, the gentle pour a soothing rhythm against the harsh buzz of my earlier alarm. As the machine sputtered to life, I grabbed a bagel, tossing it into the toaster. The scent of coffee mingled with the warmth of toasting bread, a small comfort against the chill of the morning. On the TV, the anchor discussed something about a newly discovered celestial body. "Its trajectory is bringing it closer to Earth than initially predicted," the anchor said, "but experts urge the public to remain calm as they monitor the situation closely." I glanced at my reflection in the darkened window above the sink. Shaggy brown hair fell into my eyes and I brushed it away impatiently. My blue eyes, usually bright and alert, looked back at me, tired and clouded with the remnants of my dream. I was tall, my frame well built from my military days, though now carrying the weight of my past. I didn't have time for reminiscing. I had a job to get to, a life to keep piecing together, one day at a time. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a hurried bite of my breakfast. Kip meowed from under the table, a gentle reminder of his presence. All right, I muttered, filling Kip's bowl with kibble. The cat purred, weaving between my legs as he began to eat. I finished my coffee and grabbed my jacket, keys jingling in my hand as I gave Kip a quick pat on the head. "Be good, bud," I said, though Kip was too busy eating to pay me any mind. I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the cold biting into my skin and causing my old wounds to ache. I winced and touched my back where the scar was. "I'll be okay," I said to reassure myself as I started jogging toward my truck in the parking lot. As I ran, I saw a few of my neighbors outside, clustered in small groups, talking animatedly. Curious, I approached a group of them. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had always been kind to me, was in the middle of the conversation. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," I greeted her. "What's going on?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with concern. "Joel, have you seen the news? They're saying something strange is happening with the planets. It's all very unsettling." I nodded, trying to appear casual. "Yeah, I heard something about that. What are they saying exactly?" Another neighbor, Mr. Patel, chimed in. "It's not just the planets. There are reports of strange phenomena all over the world. People disappearing, unusual weather patterns, even animals behaving oddly. No one seems to know what's going on." My mind raced as I processed their words. "Sounds like a lot of speculation," I said, trying to downplay the unease that was creeping up my spine. "I'm sure the authorities will figure it out." Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "I hope you're right, Joel, but it's hard not to worry when everything feels so off." I forced a smile. "Just take it one day at a time. That's all we can do." If I hadn't been running out of time, I probably would have stayed and helped to ease their concerns more than I already had. But I really couldn't afford to be late again. Jim had given me enough chances, and I didn't want to repay that kindness by being late once more. Pushing the distraction aside, I continued to my truck, their conversation echoing in my mind. I reached my old 07 Ford Ranger. The faded blue paint and worn seats held memories of countless cross-country trips. As I turned the key, the engine hummed to life, enveloping me in a familiar warmth. The radio clicked on, an old country song about wheat and beer playing in the background as I looked behind myself. I shifted into reverse and began to pull out. At that moment, a figure stepped out from behind the car next to mine, and in a brief instance of panic, I almost didn't hit the brake in time. With my heart racing, I yelled, "Hey! What are you doing?" The man turned his head to look at me with a realization of what had almost happened. The man glanced back up for a moment, and then walked away quickly, heading toward the apartments I had just left. Frustrated, I pulled out and continued to leave the parking lot, rushing to make it to work on time. As I drove, I noticed others on the sides of the roadway, some making panicked calls and others looking worried. Stopping at the light, I stuck my head out of the window and asked a passerby, "Hey, do you know what's going on?" The man looked at me with wide eyes. "It's all over the news. Something big is happening. They're not saying exactly what, but it's serious." I thanked him and drove on, my mind racing. Arriving at Jim's, I pulled around to the back and parked in my usual spot under a spruce tree next to the dumpsters. Exiting the car, the radio clicked off and I shut the door, now noticing that there weren't any other vehicles in the parking lot. I paused for a moment, looking around and not seeing anyone else. I can't be the first one here, can I? I knew that at the very least, David and Jamie should already be inside prepping for service. Worry tugging at my mind, I walked up to the back door and rang the bell, waiting for someone to answer. After what seemed like several minutes, no one came. I tried again, ringing the bell several times and knocked on the door loudly, hoping that perhaps I just hadn't been heard. Again, no one answered. I suddenly felt very alone, like I was the last person on Earth, and a sense of despair crept its way into me. Trying not to panic, I thought to myself, maybe they had to close for some reason and forgot to tell me. I walked around the side of the bar to the front and noticed that there were absolutely no cars driving on the normally very busy roadway. Unsettled, I peered through the windows, trying to see if anyone was inside, and found no one. The lights were left on, and some chairs were moved to sit in front of the TV at the bar. The TV was still playing, showing a news anchor speaking about something and scenes of a presidential motorcade making its way to a large jumbo jet that appeared to be heavily modified. I tried the door next and, to my surprise, found it unlocked. Hesitating, I opened it and slowly walked through. As I stepped into the doorway, the sound of the TV filled the void of silence. I examined my surroundings. A coffee cup still steaming sat on the table, the remote next to it, and a half-eaten breakfast burrito was on the bar top. It was as if they had been there one moment, and the next they were gone. If the door had been locked, I might be able to explain away this situation, but Jamie was responsible and reliable. Leaving the bar unattended and the door unlocked, something was wrong, and I could feel it in my core. I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and began to dial my boss to see what was happening. Something on the TV caught my attention. We just got confirmation from our correspondent at the White House that the president has been evacuated onto the National Airborne Operations Center, or what some people are nicknaming the Doomsday Plane. I looked at the TV and grabbed the remote to turn up the volume. We now know that the president's cabinet has been evacuated with him, and other members in the line of succession have been brought to different secure safe houses throughout the country. The broadcast continued. Major General Gaines joins us, no? Suddenly, the screen flickered, and the broadcast was replaced by silent static. Fear rose in my heart as a quiet certainty filled my mind that something terrible was happening. Flashbacks of my time in Iraq passed before my eyes, taking all my willpower to suppress. I relied on my military training to quell the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. Heart pounding, I looked back at my phone and began to dial my mom. I needed to know if she was all right. It rang for a painfully long time until finally reaching her voicemail. "Mom, please pick up, it's Joel. I'm okay, but I need to know if you are too. Please call me back. I love you." I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it for a solid moment before dialing her again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. I tried for a fourth and fifth time to get a hold of my mom, but she wouldn't answer. It was painful not knowing. I looked back up at the TV, still showing static, when suddenly the emergency alert system tone blared to life from it, and my phone, cutting through the silence like a blade. A blend of urgency and dread. It began with a low, guttural hum, like the distant growl of an approaching storm before rising in pitch, morphing into a staccato rhythm. Startled, I jumped up in surprise. Then a message began to play. Emergency alert. Incoming catastrophic event. Immediate action required. Seek shelter.
A man began to speak on the TV. "Dear citizens," he said in a somber tone, "we have failed you. For the sake of our great nation and the world, take shelter. Survive what is to come."
Instructions followed, now playing in a robotic voice. Immediate actions. Seek shelter immediately. Survive. The message and the alert cut off into a deafening void of silence, as if all the sound in the world had been sucked into nothingness. Stunned, I looked at my phone for a long moment, and then the world began to shake around me.
10 minutes prior to the emergency broadcast. President Foster. I sat rigidly in my chair aboard the National Airborne Operations Center, my hands clenched tightly together. Despite the calm demeanor I tried to project, I couldn't hide the deep-seated fear in my eyes as I stared at the screens displaying live feeds of the approaching planet. "Mr. President," General Hayes began, his voice steady despite the circumstances, "the planetary barrier we had in place has failed. Its collapse coincided precisely with Planet X's approach. We are still trying to understand if there was a direct interaction, but the timing is unfortunate, to say the least." My face paled. The barrier had been Earth's clandestine shield, a high-energy grid developed in secret over decades with the help of Russia, China, and dozens of other nations. The public had never been aware of its existence, nor the danger it was meant to protect against. "What are our options?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I knew the answer but had to ask, had to hope there was something we had overlooked. General Hayes exchanged a look with Dr. Emily Stanton, our chief scientific advisor. She stepped forward, her face somber. "Sir, With the barrier down, our options to defend against whatever Planet X brings with it are significantly limited. We estimate that we have only 10 minutes before it arrives due to its increased velocity. Once it does, we expect that communications may be lost as the interference we observe surrounding it encapsulates the Earth. And the military, I pressed, looking for any sliver of a chance to take action further than we already had. We have enacted Operation Starfall, Hayes responded, pausing to let the impact of those words sink in. All branches of the military are currently deploying to their designated rally points across the country. We're setting up defensive positions, ensuring that our Judicator missiles and area of denial systems are ready. Hayes looked grave. Mr. President, we are out of time. We did not expect the speed at which this event would arrive. I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of our situation. So, we're essentially powerless to do anything else? In terms of offense, yes, Dr. Stanton confirmed. Our science and technology have limits, Mr. President. This event, it's beyond our control. The room fell silent, the only sounds the distant hum of the plane's engines and the soft beeps from the monitors. My thoughts wandered to my family, to the citizens of the nation, and to the world at large. We had long ago discovered the possibility of this threat and had enacted the planetary barrier as our primary defense against it, but now that was gone, and our contingency plan was limited. We need to focus on what we can control, I finally said, my voice firm, clinging to my role as president. We need to warn the people and give them every chance we can to survive whatever is to come. General Hayes nodded. We have the emergency broadcast system ready for you. Then, we need to warn them now, before our lines of communication are taken from us, I said, thinking of the panic that must already be setting in. As you wish, Mr. President, Dr. Stanton said. She paused before adding, Sir, there may still be a slim chance. Our teams are exploring every theoretical avenue, anything that might mitigate the effects of this. Keep me updated, Emily. Any glimmer of hope, we pursue it, I instructed, my resolve hardening. As the team dispersed to their tasks, I looked out the small, reinforced window of the plane. Below, the Earth seemed peaceful, unmarred by the chaos I knew would soon unfold. I wondered if there was more I could have done, if the barrier could have been strengthened, if we had missed some crucial calculation. But deep down, I knew we were at the mercy of the event that was coming, and all we could do was face it with dignity and the will to protect humanity as long as we could.
Chapter 2. Back to the present. Jolnir. The world shook beneath my feet, an unrelenting tremor that turned the ground into a shifting nightmare. The silence left by the emergency alert was replaced by the terrible noise of the building I was in, beginning to fall apart all around me. Dust was filling the air, turning it thick and hard to breathe within, as the visceral terror of my new reality filled me. I ran for the door and stumbled out of the bar, just as the glass of the windows exploded behind me, causing several pieces of glass to cut through my shirt and into my back. Tensing with a searing pain as my back began to bleed into my shirt, my heart pounded as I took in the scene outside. Dozens of people had also run into the street to escape the businesses and homes they had taken refuge in as they began to collapse all around us, some catching fire and others trapping people inside of them as I heard their screams. A massive shadow covered the sky, drawing my attention up, and to my horror, I saw a large planet above us where the sun had once been. An alien world filled with swirling red and black clouds, lightning streaking across its surface, had manifested perilously close to the earth. The air around me was thick with an electric tension, and a sense of doom gripped me like a vice. Staring above me, I watched as 4 massive beings of light descended from the planet and into the sky above. Their radiance and aura like 1,000 small suns burning my vision, making my eyes water as I squinted in pain. Behind them I saw an army, millions strong of humanoid creatures, each clad in gleaming golden armor. 6 black wings sprouted from their backs, and in their hands they held obsidian spears and giant tower-like shields that shimmered with fire. I watched, stunned, as the army of invaders spread out and flew to the 4 corners of the earth. With dread, I watched as thousands split off of one of the larger groups and descended towards us with an unimaginable speed. The people around me screamed and began to run. Individuals, families, small groups broke into a terrified scramble, trying to seek any shelter that they could. Jets roared above me as they broke the sound barrier in their mad dash to intercept the ascending force, and sirens began to blare around the city. Missiles streaked through the sky, the concussive shock waves of their explosions resounding through the air as they found their targets. Few of the angelic creatures fell, as most were able to shield themselves from the hellfire that the Air Force had unleashed against them. A dozen broke formation and gave chase after the jets as they performed large aerial maneuvers to reposition themselves for another approach. I watched as these beings with their powerful wings chased down one of the jets, and with their obsidian spears cut deep into it, causing it to explode and fall to the ground miles away from where I stood. Buildings around me continued to collapse, and fires began to rage as the sky was filled with smoke, ash, and the wails of the dying and injured. The heat grew unbearable, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh. A man 10 feet away from me knelt over a woman who had a terrible head wound and lifeless eyes, his screams and tears falling onto her broken face. My thoughts turned to the only person left in my life who I still deeply cared about, my mother. She lived at the southern edge of the city, and I had to get to her. I hoped she was with her friends Danielle and Carol, that she wasn't alone, that someone was with her through all this chaos. I needed to be there for her, to protect her, to keep her safe. Shaking myself into action, I turned and sprinted at a full run to my truck near the back of the now collapsed bar. Breathing heavily, my hands shaking, I felt in my pockets for my keys and quickly pulled them out, fumbling with them for a precious moment. Unlocking the door, I jumped in, not bothering to even close it, and started my old Ford Ranger, hearing its engine roar to life like a battle cry to my ears. Putting the truck into reverse, I stepped on the gas, almost hitting the rubble of the building behind me, before stopping to turn and pull forward. I floored it and sped out of the parking lot into the chaotic roadway, hell breaking out in front of me as I drove forward with reckless abandon. My military training took over to focus my thoughts and movements as I weaved through the madness. The streets were chaotic, filled with screaming people, burning cars, and debris from collapsing buildings. Spokane was unrecognizable. Buildings lay in ruins, their skeletal remains jutting into the sky. The choking smoke and fire revealed bodies of men, women, and children as I went. I swerved around obstacles, narrowly avoiding collisions with other desperate drivers. The sky was filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions, and the golden armored invaders were everywhere, their dark spears flashing as they cut down anyone who was unfortunate enough to find themselves in their way. As I drove, I saw people fighting back against these heavenly demons with whatever they had. Guns, makeshift weapons, even their bare hands. At a glance, I could tell it was a losing battle. The invaders were too powerful, their numbers too great. I saw a group of soldiers, police, and even firefighters making a stand at a barricade, their faces set in grim determination. But even as I watched, the invaders were overwhelming them, the blades of their spears cutting through flesh and bone. Gritting my teeth, I pushed down on the accelerator harder. I knew if I slowed down even for a moment, my chances of reaching my mom would go down dramatically. I couldn't focus on the carnage around me. I couldn't let the pain around me be a distraction. The only thing that mattered to me was reaching her before it was too late. I was flying through the city at a pace that meant a single wrong move or unlucky moment would likely kill me. Yet, even at the speed I was going, it felt like a lifetime before I reached the small neighborhood where my mom lived. The truck skidded and lurched as I navigated the debris-strewn streets leading up to her house. I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting one of the Golden Warriors to descend upon me. But I was lucky. Or maybe they were too preoccupied with the inner city. The fires were less intense here as the houses spread out from each other, the destruction not as complete yet. I turned onto my mom's street, my heart racing in my chest. The house was partially standing. One side had collapsed and the roof sagged dangerously. Hitting my brakes hard as I pulled up to her house, the truck came to a stop and I jumped out without bothering to check my surroundings, too focused on finding her. My heart was racing in my chest and I desperately called out to her, shouting her name at the top of my lungs. "Mom! Mom, where are you?" Even to my own ears I could hear my desperation, the pleading in my voice clear. I heard a faint, weak cry from beneath the rubble. "Joel! In here!" Sprinting to where I heard her voice, I dove and began to tear at the debris with my bare hands, throwing aside chunks of concrete and wood. My fingers were bleeding, made raw by my efforts, but I didn't care. I had to reach her. After several agonizing minutes, I had finally uncovered her. She was trapped under a large beam, and her face was pale, her hair matted with black blood. Her eyes looked up at me, filled with pain and fear. Still, she smiled gently at me in the way that she always did. "You found me. I knew you would," she said so softly that I could barely hear her. "Mom, hold on," I said, my voice pained as I knew I may already be too late to save her. "I'm going to get you out. Just hold still as I move this off of you." Her smile faltered and she began to cough violently as her eyes closed. Struggling to catch her breath, she said, "It's okay, Joel. It's okay." I knew I needed to free her. Her airways were being constricted by the heavy beam that was trapping her where she lay. Wrapping my arms around it, I began to try to lift it and let a long, pained yell break from my body as I pushed with everything I had in me to move it. My muscles strained to the point that I felt several in my back begin to rip, and pain shot through my entire body. I had managed to move the beam just enough for her to catch her breath, but not enough to free her from under it. It was too heavy and I was too weak. I felt a sob rise and catch in my throat. I couldn't save her by myself, and we were very alone. "Mom, hold on a bit longer. I'm going to find a way to get you out," I said as I began to frantically look around for anything I could find to help me leverage the beam off of her body. "Joel," she said, her voice so tired. "I love you so much, son. Your dad and I, we are so proud of you. You need to survive. You need to keep fighting and live." Choking back tears, I nodded. "I love you too, Mom. I'm so sorry." I knelt down next to her, placing my arms around her broken body and began to weep. "I'll be with your dad in heaven, don't worry. He always took such good care of me." She said so quietly I could barely hear her. Her breathing was very weak and her pulse was so slow. I held her like that until she took her last breath, a small smile on her lips. My heart broke. The world around me was in chaos, but in those last moments all I could think about was her. She had given me everything. She had always been there for me, and now she was gone, and I was alone once again. I stayed with her for what felt like hours until the sun was low in the sky. The sound of gunfire and loud explosions were getting closer. Those demons caused this. They murdered her. Even if it wasn't their hands directly, it was their fault that she was dead. They took the only person that mattered to me in this world. An ember, somewhere deep in my soul, caught fire within me. Righteous anger blazed to life inside me, like I had never known before. Hatred for the scum that had taken her from me overwhelmed my mind. They were still out there destroying countless lives. I didn't know if I could stop them, but I would be damned if I didn't do everything I could to make them feel the pain I was feeling now, the loss that had ripped open a void in my heart. I turned and walked back to my truck. My heart was heavy, but my mind set on a single purpose. I wanted to kill, to burn them all. Somewhere deep in my rational mind, I knew that at the moment, I didn't have any way to actually hurt these bastards. I needed a weapon, a gun. Heck, a shovel would work if I couldn't find anything else. I knew I wasn't thinking rationally, but I just wanted to make them pay, and it was difficult to focus on anything else. I remembered that in my apartment I kept a hunting rifle my dad had given me as a present a year before he died. It had been years since I had gone to the range or used it for anything, but I was sure I still had a box of ammo in the closet. Oh shit, Kip! Horrified, I remembered that Kip was still in my apartment. The little guy had only been in my life for a short while, but he was a companion to me, always helping to distract me from the deep depression that threatened to drown me on a daily basis. I got into my truck and took off down the road, driving as fast as I could in the encroaching darkness. Perhaps I could still make it to my apartment, get Kip and my gun, and then put in some work against these bastards that had done so much harm to my world. As I drove away from my mother's house, the fires of Spokane began to light up the evening sky. I knew that the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning, and I was determined to see it through to the end. For my mom. The drive back to my apartment was surreal. The once familiar streets of Spokane had been transformed into a war zone. The horizon was a hellscape of burning buildings, each casting flickering shadows that could hide any number of monsters inside of them. The roads were filled with abandoned vehicles, some overturned, others with doors left open, suggesting that their occupants had fled in panic. I weaved my Ford Ranger through the devastation, my mind a chaotic mess of rage and grief. The sounds of battle echoed in the distance, gunfire, explosions, the unmistakable cries of agony of the dying. The sky above was a twisted macabre of red glows and white lightning. The alien planet, still partially visible in the night, hung ominously above, threatening to end everything. As I neared my apartment complex, I saw that it too had not been spared. The building partially collapsed and flames licked at its sides while some units were completely engulfed. I parked my truck on the grass nearest to my apartment and jumped out, running as quickly as I could to the entrance. Praying to any god above that could hear me, I quietly asked that Kip was still okay. As I approached, I saw that the front door was broken and hanging off of its hinges. I pulled and then pushed it aside, creating an opening to the smoke-filled apartment. The acrid smell of burning plastic and refuse assaulted my senses as I entered carefully. It was difficult to see as I entered and navigated the debris-strewn hallway, my eyes burning from the smoke. The sounds of the building groaning and wood cracking in the fire filled my ears, a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded me. As I rounded the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the golden armored demons was standing in my living room, its obsidian spear glinting in the firelight. It hadn't seen me yet, but I knew it would only be a moment before it realized I was in the room. I needed to move quickly. I scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon, and my eyes landed on a broken piece of piping that had fallen out of part of the collapsed roof. It lay in a pile of rubble around 3 feet to my left, just within my reach. I bent down and prayed that I wasn't hurt. I picked it up, its weight heavy in my hand. Stealthily, I crept my way up behind the invader, my heart pounding in my chest, threatening to give me away with each pulse of my blood. The humanoid creature seemed otherworldly up close. It was large, around 7 feet tall and very broad. The golden armor it wore was intricately designed, with patterns that seemed to shift and move as if they were alive. Its 6 wings were folded behind it, the feathers an onyx black, radiating a glow that illuminated the rest of its body, and a stark contrast to the darkness around us. I raised the metal pipe high above my head, and then swung down with all of my might, placing the weight of my entire body into the swing. The pipe connected with the back of the creature's head, the impact reverberating through my arms and hurting my already frayed hands. The invader stumbled forward, more surprised than hurt, and turned around quickly to face me. Its eyes, they were so cold, a vivid blue that seemed to emanate their own source of light. Its face was surprisingly human, but covered with ancient-looking symbols tattooed onto its bronze skin. It looked into my eyes, locking its gaze with mine. It raised its spear and lunged forward so quickly that I barely had any time to even twitch as I felt a searing pain in my side. Trying desperately to not pass out from the pain and blood loss, I took my right arm and locked it firmly around the shaft that was penetrating my body. I took the pipe in my left hand and swung it again, this time aiming for its face. It raised its shield and blocked my strike with ease, the force of the impact sending vibrations throughout my body. The intense pain in my side was the only thing that kept me conscious as it withdrew its spear and began to circle me. My apartment being our battleground, I repositioned myself to find better footing and to keep one of the walls to my back so that it couldn't get behind me. It moved with a surprising grace that made it seem like it was gliding across the floor, and as it did so, it unfurled its wings slightly, preparing to strike me once again. I knew I couldn't match its strength, but I had to try. I wouldn't die here in the darkness alone. It lunged again, and expecting it this time, I leaned to the side, dodging its attack by the slimmest margin possible. In that same movement, I swung my pipe and connected with a satisfying thud against its exposed side. The creature let out a surprised growl of pain and turned to me, its spear flashing in the light of the fire as it attacked with a renewed fury. Doing my best to parry the countless thrusts of the spear, my metal pipe being a sad substitute for a real weapon, I managed to hold on while taking dozens of small cuts on my arms and legs. Memories of my mom's dead body, her final smile while she lay in my arms flashed before my mind. Rage and desperation overtook me, fueling my body, giving me a strength that I didn't know I had. Time seemed to slow down in that moment, just enough that I saw an opening and swung my pipe with all my might, aiming for its fucking head. The metal pipe connected with a sickening crunch, and the demon creature staggered, its spear falling from its hand and clattering to the floor. I didn't hesitate. I tackled the monster and knocked it to the floor while I scrambled to get on top of it. I took my pipe and I swung at its stupid face. I swung again, and again, and again, each strike fueled by my rage and desire to end its life. It stopped struggling after the first few hits. After the 10th, it became still, and after the 20th, there wasn't a head anymore. Its lifeless body, a twisted heap of golden armor, black wings, blood, and gore lay beneath me. I sat there on top of it for several long moments, breathing heavily, my hands shaking, my body trembling as the adrenaline coursed through my veins and began to ebb. The reality of what I had just done hit me. I had killed one of them, and I liked it. Somewhere in the furthest recesses of my mind, a deep voice was laughing. I knew I had only killed one of them, and I was hurt. My side was bleeding still from the wound it had given me. I was so tired, and my body felt like it couldn't go on any further. But I also knew that I couldn't stop now. I needed to push forward. There were still millions of these monsters out there, and I wouldn't be done until they were all dead. I pushed the thought aside and turned to look around my apartment. It was surprisingly mostly intact. I stumbled to get up, my hands slick with sweat and blood, my legs weak with exhaustion. I needed to find Kip and my gun before more of these things showed up. With effort, I stood and quietly called out, "Kip! Kip, come here!" I heard a faint meow coming from my bedroom, and with what strength I had left, I rushed in, finding him hiding under the bed. His little eyes were wide with fear, and he was covered in dust, but he seemed to be mostly unharmed. I reached under the bed and gently pulled him out, holding him close as he struggled against my grip, trying to find somewhere to run and hide. His cool fur against my skin was a small comfort amidst the pain racking my body. Taking the shirt that had been laying on my floor, I quickly wrapped him up and tied him to my waist to ensure he wouldn't make a break for it. I was worried he might escape in his panic, and that I wouldn't have the energy to chase him down before he got hurt. I then made my way to the bathroom and pulled out my first aid kit from below the sink. Scrounging through it, I was able to find gauze, and using the wrap that came with it, I gingerly treated my wound. From my time in the army, I knew basic first aid and made sure to disinfect it with some hydrogen peroxide. The pain from doing so nearly knocked me out as it drove the breath from me, but I held on, gritting my teeth through the worst of it. Exiting the bathroom, I went to my dresser and grabbed one of my spare shirts before throwing it on. Then, reaching the closet, I grabbed my rifle and the box of ammo I had laying next to it. The weight of the rifle was almost too much for me in my current condition, and I struggled to place the carrying strap over my shoulder. It wasn't much, but it was better than a metal pipe. Digging a bit further through my closet, I also grabbed the backpack my dad and I had cobbled together before he passed away. It was filled with essentials in case of emergency, and he had always insisted I keep it just in case.